Please. Well, thank you so much for being here. As you would expect from a guest, I'm delighted to be here. I'm grateful for the invitation. But on top of the usual nice things that you would expect someone like me to say for being here, I think there's one point that makes me particularly happy to be here, and that is that what I'm presenting to you today is totally a work in progress, at least the second half. And I thought that this was a unique opportunity to test some ideas. Now, when I'm optimistic about, last week, about some of the ideas I'm presenting here, I thought that they were freshly baked, and therefore you could enjoy them straight from the oven. When I wake up less optimistic, I think that they are half-baked, and you will be disappointed. So whether they're freshly or half-baked, you will decide. What's going to happen about this talk is that, as you know, practice is that you read the talk several times until finally, hopefully, it is boiled down to something that you can put on a scientific paper. So hopefully, your input will show up in that paper sooner rather than later. So with this general introduction and acknowledgement of gratefulness on my side, let me give you just a very quick introduction to the topic today. What I'm going to talk about, basically the talk is divided into two halves. The first half is the easy bit, because it's the technical one. So the first half is on information as we understand it normally among information scientists, logicians, engineers. Of course, what I'm presenting to you is a philosopher looking at those topics. Well, basically, an answer to the question, what is information coming from that particular department? The second half of the talk, more on with slides in a moment, is an attempt to understand what happens when that information that you're dealing with has a meaning. It's more than just the data, it's more than just the signals, it's more than just the digits that are being transferred, but they are meaningful for agents like us. So the second half is really about semantic information with meaning, rather than just information as such, as we understand it in other contexts. So here's what I'm going to talk about. First of all, since I didn't quite know what kind of sort of the nature of the audience, I will tell you a little bit about Shannon, and I hope that going quickly through that set of slides will refresh memories for some of you and will be sufficiently introductory for some others. I will try to guess from your faces whether there's well-known stuff or whether to slow down. So the second topic will be the so-called inversion relation principle, something that should be well-known around economics because it was first theorized by Popper. And then we will move to the correlation model. Now, these three topics are three attempts, not by the people who developed those techniques and visual science, but by other people to make sense of semantic information when you actually rely on, let's call it the mathematical side of information science. So the view here that I'm going to introduce in 20 slides is the following. Whatever you pick up, I call this, I like this in my mind, the three pillars of a philosophy of information: Shannon, Pepesh, the inverse relation principle, the correlation model. If you try to squeeze semantics out of that, you're going to run into trouble. They're very good at what they are supposed to do, the engineering side, the syntactical side, the uninterpreted side, but they're very bad. In fact, they're not meant to solve problems when it comes to understanding what semantic information is. So I will try to show you by description and problems in these three cases, what they can do and what they cannot do. Things get worse, and they do by looking at the so-called data processing theorem. It's a very simple stuff, which I guess some of you might have already encountered. Again, it comes from Shannon, standard engineering understanding of information processing. But here we will see how it becomes a real puzzle why with so few data on the one hand, and all the trouble that processing data is going to cause, we have so much information on the other hand, semantic information, the kind of a world in which we live, this sort of full world around us. In order to solve the problem, I will then introduce philosophical semantics or philosophical theories of meaning. Again, that is going to be only one slide, so don't worry. But I shall just hint at a possible source of something. Again, in the same way as these guys are not supposed to deal with semantics, these guys are not supposed to deal with the foundation of semantics. These people move within syntax, and these people move from semantics to semantics. If you want to have an analogy, they tell you how to cook pasta, they don't tell you how to make pasta. We want to know how to make pasta. We want to know how to generate meaning. We don't want to know, once you have meaning, you can do so many things. Okay? So we want to know how to earn the first £1,000. We don't want to learn how to invest them. These people will tell you how to invest them. They will tell you how to cook the pasta. So that some kind of help will come from here. At this point, by having the syntax and the semantics, we have some kind of a bias with that particular spelling analogy, whereby we can start squeezing and holding the problem between these two sides, the syntactic side and the semantic side. We'll try to understand what semantic information looks like. And finally, that's the work in progress part. And it's probably here where people will find more room for disagreement, I guess. How we can try to understand semantic information from a constructionist model. That will be the conclusion, and it will be about 3 slides. So, that's what was a quick tour through the talk. Let's get down to some business. Now, as you know, information is coded, transmitted, and stored in specific quantities, like physical signals. That's not new to anyone. And some features are obviously intuitively quantifiable. That's what we call broadband hard disks and stuff that is inside. Information is additive, like biscuits, but unlike averages. You put 1 bit of information to get another and you get 2 bits of information. And it's never negative, like probabilities and interest rates, unlike bank accounts or temperatures. Now this quantitative size, and is the summarizing, refreshing bit of for many of you. You can deal with those quantitative side in many ways. There are loads of mathematical tools to deal with that. Shannon, or what is called as information theory, is just one of them. Only one, the most famous, not the only. It's important to remember that it's just a branch of probability theory. I will bang on that point again and again. In other words, you don't find any meaning in it. Okay. It doesn't mean that it's meaningless. It means that it is not yet meaningful. So you got lots of data that are being handled according to particular ways. So the mathematical theory of communication, as it should be called, is also known as information theory. It was an appealing label. Shannon, in the end, regretted ever having used it. He thought it was a big mistake. People start getting confused. We're still there, especially in the philosophy part. MTC, Shannon, your standard engineering approach, treats information as a data communication. The goal is efficient ways of encoding and transferring data, not interpreting data. The basic idea is that information is quantified in terms of decrease in data deficit. The information you're going to send me is quantified in terms of how big and empty my glass is. So if my glass is full, you're not going to send me any information. More on this analogy in a moment with coins. This again is Wikipedia level, so forgive me for just reminding you about simple points. Again, I showed how you had already covered this. Shannon information theory quantifies information by considering the number of yes/no questions required to determine what the source is communicating. So, if you toss the coin, I don't know what the result is, and of course, there's only one question is sufficient to guess the result. That's why we have one coin, head or tail, coin here, and it will come back to home class, is a fair coin, something that does not exist. So it's an ideal presentation. All of that is fine, and we need to have it in our background. The other bit of information I need to have in our background is this particular model, which is standard again among information scientists. I'll turn these things that you can find anyway in the textbook. If we have John having a problem with his car because the battery is flat and calling the mechanic, then John is the information source. He's going to tell the mechanic that something is wrong with the car, that the battery is flat, so there's a coding coming up and decoding coming down procedure through a particular language, in this case English. The channel communication, we'll just assume it's a telephone call, and there's some possible noise being precisely understood as data received, never sent. So that's noise. And so unwanted data. The informative information share the same background knowledge. Basically, if you call a garage, the garage will expect you to come up with some problems. You're not calling the pizzeria. And therefore, they also have a shared collection of usable symbols. In this particular case, they share English. Now, with all this is something that has been with us ever since. No matter what we do, when we deal with information, semantic, non-semantic, in computer science, anywhere else, this model has been with us ever since. And there's a problem with that model. I will not discuss it today, but maybe if we have time, we will waste some time. So still on Shannon communication model, that was the quickest possible way of introducing it. There are some problems with that. The problems are not for the engineering department, the problems are for the semantic department. Information in this case is only a selection of one symbol from a set of possible symbols. Remember, head and tail, you just select one, H, out of H T. Now, this is, I hope, is going to be enlightening in terms of understanding that that kind of information has got nothing to do with two improbable yes, 50-50, contain the same amount of information for Shannon, even if one is the answer to is the battery flat and the other one is would you marry? Okay, so that's the point. We're not dealing with relevance, meaning we're just dealing with the probabilities of the signal sent. So in mathematical theory of communication, the maximum amount of information is produced by a perfectly random sequence, and the classic monkey comes with that. Classic monkey, no, typing randomly on a keyboard. That is the most informative source you can possibly imagine, as long as we understand what we're talking about, the tossing of the coin. More on this in a moment, and I'm sure that monkey will become more intelligible in a little while. But I hope you understand why now that is really not going to help us when it comes to understand what semantic information is. This is a theory of information without meaning. As I said, not meaningless, but not yet meaningful. So it's something that is there in order to help us to make sense of information. The same theory deals with messages comprising uninterpreted symbols, then encoding with false sequence of signals. These are metadata that constitute but are not yet semantic information. Without those data, you don't have the semantic information, but there's done much more that needs to be added. So really, the mathematical theory of communication is the study of information at the syntactic level, the level at which syntax here is to be understood in a sort of broad sense, the sense in which you talk about rules and patterns, uninterpreted, the same sense in which architects may be talking about the syntax of building, or musicians about the syntax of music. It's all that has got to do with tokens and patterns of tokens. And since computers are good at that, that's why the perfect marriage between information theory and computer science. That's why the internet, that's why everything else. But as I said, I hope this is just a reminder that nothing particularly new. Let me try to show you one way of tackling the semantic side. We can talk about the semantic content of a particular message. Say, the beer is in the fridge, or the battery is flat. as whatever is there that is not yet been saturated by an answer. So imagine the battery is flat as the message that you receive. Decouple within that message a question, a Boolean question, from the yes/no answer. Imagine I have a particular speech impediment and I learn English in the worst possible way. All I learn, instead of proper sentences, I can only talk in terms of questions plus answer. There are some Californian people who speak just that. They always end sentences with question marks. The beer is in the fridge. So imagine that I cannot say the beer is in the fridge. All I can say is the beer in the fridge? Yes. All the time, for anything. You ask me, where's the fridge? In the kitchen. Is the fridge in the kitchen? Yes. And so on. You can see that what we're doing here is that if you take away the yes/no answers, all you're left are the questions, which contain all the good stuff, all the quote-unquote information. What the mathematical theory of communication deals with is with the tokens that you attach to those questions. So imagine information, semantic information, being decoupled into questions and answers. Take away the answers. You have a mathematical theory that deals with all the answers, the yes/nos, the zeros and ones. You're left with everything else. That was the content that we still have to have. So the mathematical theory of communication studies identification and transmission of information by treating it as data keys. The yes/no, the head and tail, as the amount of detail in a signal, message, or memory space necessary to saturate the info means unsaturated information. I want to know whether it's head and tail. That's where all the content is really lying. Your 1 or 0 and H or T will saturate that bit. Okay, so that should be enough to explain why, if we go down that particular road, and some theoreticians have tried that, we're not going to get semantics. We're just going to get more tokens, more rules, more signals. Now, for that reason, I would argue that the analysis of semantic information has become increasingly autonomous from the mathematical theory of communication, but there are two important connections still there. We have imagined these couple of things. One is the communication model that I told you before, that particular picture with the garage, the guy sending the message over the phone and so on. The sender, message, receiver, to simplify. And the other one is the inverse relationship principle, which is an intuition that comes hand in hand with unpredictability. Now, what is that? I hope this is better choice of fonts. I'm sorry. So I'll read it aloud if it's not very visible. Well, the inverse relation between the probability of P, where P may be a proposition, a sentence, a complete language, an event, a situation, a possible world, and the amount of semantic information carried by P. Let's think about this for a moment. It's the inverse relationship between probability of that P and how much that P is informative. That sounds plausible in the following way. Suppose I'm organizing a dinner at home, and my wife wants to know how many people are coming. And I say, less than 100. That's true. Suppose that just count. But look, less than 100. Well, the probability that less than 100 compared to less than 50 is much higher. So it's satisfied by many more situations, less than 100, than less than 50. Or less than 10, or less than 8, less than 4. So the closer I get to, say, 2, the less the number of possible worlds I'm satisfying in front of me. Right? This. Sorry for those who've actually got it, but some pages don't seem to see this into it. Let's work the opposite way. How many people are more than 2, more than 3, more than 4, more and more. And now suppose we cover more and more possibilities to the point when it becomes more and more likely that I'm right. I don't know how many people are coming, but I say, well, maybe less than 100, less than 1,000, less than a billion, less than 10 billion. I'm going to be right. Is that informative? No, of course not. how much more informative could I make that? Or by saying less than a billion, less than a million, less than 100, da, da, da. So the probability of what I'm saying being true is immensely related to how informative what I'm saying is. This important balance is with us and is taken as something reasonable that you would expect from this sort of theory. So an event, situation, possible world, sentence, whatever you want, that you are assessing has these two values to balance. How likely it is and how informative it can be. Suppose we have a biased coin. Not a coin, remember, it's 50-50, but a coin that most of the times turns out to be head. How informative is it that it's going to be head? Well, not much, since most of the times it turns out to be head anyway. Suppose that 99.99% of the cases it's always head. I'm not even going to ask you. I know it's going to be head. Suppose he has two heads and not tails. I wouldn't ask him. Because whatever answer that I get is non-informative. Why? Because the probability of being heads is 1. It couldn't be otherwise. Now this looks reasonable, and is one of the three pillars. Is the second pillar. It's inverse relationship between informativeness and probability. Unfortunately, once you start looking at that more carefully, it becomes counterintuitive. There are two problems at the extreme. One is known as the scandal of deduction, and the other one is called the Barkillo-Carnot paradox. One has been labeled scandal of deduction by Hintikka, and the other one, the paradox, by your lovely speaker. So here's the situation. Remember, the more likely something is, the less informative. The closer I get to 100% heads, the less informative being told that it is heads is going to be. So that seems to be plausible, but what happens when we look at the extremes? What happens when the probability of P, whatever sentence you have in mind, is 1? P is a tautology, my morphological logic, but because it's 1, its informativeness is 0. If I tell you that A is equal to A, you're not going to be thankful. If I tell you that the train leaves today at the same time that it was leaving yesterday, assuming that there is that tautology, again, you're not going to be very grateful, and so forth. I tell you that Luciano is called Luciano, you name it. So, if when I call the garage, I'm going to be told that the battery is or is not flat, thanks. Now, unfortunately, what happens is that in classical logic, all the mathematics you ever done is reconstructed in terms of mathematical logic, which is classically understood in terms of inferences from premises to conclusions. These inferences are valid only if they are tautological. Therefore, all the mathematics you ever studied is non-informative. Now, that is an unpleasant conclusion. And it's something that has been called the scandal of deduction ever since logicians have realized that that was the case. So something has to go. Either the principle, or our understanding of the reduction of mathematics to mathematical logic, or our understanding of mathematical logic as based on tautologies, or something else. Look at the opposite side, when the probability of what we're talking about is 0. If that is the case, then that is a contradiction. But remember, this was non-informative because it was on the opposite extreme. Well, if we move to the other side, things become more and more informative, the less likely they are. In fact, the most informative bit of information you can ever get is something that is incredible, that is extraordinarily unexpected. Well, hit the bottom line, and you get the contradictions are the most informative bits of information you can ever get. So, when you call the garage, being told that the battery is and is not flat, will represent the highest level of information you can possibly ask for. That is also unpleasant. So here's what it looks like. You've got a probability from 0 to 1, 50-50, the fair coin. If it is unfair, is on this side, of course, on the other side as well, heads and tails. This is a coin with 2 heads, 0 information, and probability 1. Here's what happens if you have a sentence rather than a coin. The sentence, the coin is heads, is 50-50, assumingly, and it has an informativeness 1, but the coin is either heads or tails, is the scandal deduction. Is a tautology, is always true, is assumed to have 0 informativeness. Whereas the coin is neither heads nor tails, is the paradox, because it has maximum amount of information. So this is one way of showing you that that particular inverse relation principle is not dealing well with semantics. It's just not making sense with our intuitions. Surely we want to have contradictions to be 0 informative. Surely we would like to have mathematics providing somehow, in some sense, a reasonable amount of information. So something has to be done there, in that coin as well. We move to the third pillar, the correlation with covariance model. Again, anyone who's done statistics knows this by heart. When we talk about environmental information, or information out there, we really try to grasp the semantic side of data as something that is independent of us, something that we capture and import from the world. Examples are frequent, and you like me, obsessed with CSI, seen plenty of that kind of environmental information, bullet trajectories, blood spray patterns, organ damages, fingerprints, and other rubbish like that. Now, though that is supposed to be out there, blocks of information that we just grasp and import within our models. Why does that work? Well, first of all, a clarification. Environmental information doesn't have to be natural. Imagine a particular light flashing when the battery is flat. That has been engineered. So it doesn't have to be necessarily triggering. But with that sort of clarification in place, how does this particular way of understanding information work? That's what the correlation or covariance model tries to explain. The idea is that environmental information requires 2 systems, called A and B, which are linked in such a way, they're coupled together in such a way that A, being in a particular state or having a particular feature, F, is correlated to or dynamically covariates with the fact that B, the other system, has a particular feature, G. So that the connection between the two allows the observation of one to carry information about the other. It's much simpler than it sounds. I'll show you in a moment with a simple example. That is the proper formulation. 2 systems A and B coupled in such a way that A's being of type or in state F is correlated to B being of type or in state G, thus carrying for the observer of A information that B is G. But it's litmus paper, A turning red, F, that is triggered by the fact that the liquid is acid, and therefore is informative about the fact that B is G. That's all there is. So this correlation between 2 systems, the litmus piece of paper and the acid liquid, allow one to carry information about the other. What are the problems here? We finally seem to have hit on the actual graph. So that's where finally semantic information is being dealt with. What do I mean? We've got something carrying information about something else. Well, the truth is that all the meaning there is actually provided by us. We really have pure correlations among data. There's nothing in the data but what we see in those data. This becomes much easier to understand if we look at what lies behind the correlation or covariance model. And that is known, again, I hope that some of you will find this familiar. It's called mutual information. It's also coming from Shannon. That is a measure of how dependent 2 random variables are, and the closer or the dependence, the more the dependence increases, the more or the higher the mutual information is. Again, something can be explained much more quickly with the graph. Imagine that this is one block of information you have, and this is another block of information you have. These are the 2 systems. Remember A and B? A being F, B being G. The intersection here is the mutual information that they have. By learning about this, you learn also a portion of this other guy. If the two systems are perfectly overlapping, in other words, if we're dealing with a so-called noiseless ideal channel, these two rings overlap, and knowing that allegedly the light is flashing is knowing that the battery is flat. Because if the battery is flat, the light is flashing, and vice versa. When this is not the case, for example, well, sometimes actually the light is flashing, but the battery is perfectly fine, just a mistake or a problem with the technique, we have a probability distribution. So two blocks of information are not overlapping perfectly fine. Now, mutual information does go down all the way down to 0. Imagine these two circles being completely independent of each other. If they're completely independent, their mutual information is nothing. Or it goes to maximum when the two of them completely overlap. By grasping one circle, you grasp something of the other circle. What's the problem here? But that's the way, for example, that sunflower works. And sunflower doesn't do semantics or any cell capable of reacting to your movement. What happens here is that all we have are patterns of data correlated to other patterns of data. If you have some patterns, you can infer bits of other patterns. The meaning of that? Well, we're so used to see meaning in things that it becomes natural to look at yellow light flashing and saying, oh, the battery is flat. Same light flashing elsewhere would be the dishwasher has run out of soap and so forth. So there's no real meaning there, but a connection, which again is a syntactic connection between an event and another event. So a sunflower, an amoeba, a photocell, so something natural, constructed, or alive, they make practical use of mutual information in the absence of any semantic processing or meaningful data. It's just not there yet. Again, remember, I'm not saying that it's meaningless. I'm saying we're not getting the cash. What we are being tricked into believing is that suppose you have £1,000, that's the way you can invest it. If I don't have £1,000, how do I get the first £1,000, which then I can use? How do I get the pasta, which then I can cook? So how do I basically provide a foundation such that that is going to trigger that semantic information, which then, in many ways, I can manipulate. I said that things get worse before they get a little bit better, and that's the end of the solid scientific techie bit. There's something else which I like to call your attention to, which is also a bit funny. I hope you will find it disturbing as human beings rather than sort of robots. This is a really first week introduction to engineering of information theory. The stuff gets much more complicated to a level where I don't understand it, but the bits I'm presenting to you are simple and philosophically valuable. This data processing theorem says something that sounds plausible and fine to begin with, and then causes conceptual problems. It again concerns the quantity of mutual information between different variables. Imagine in a moment you have a chain of things happening, events or systems acting and reacting. The bottom line is that the more you process information, the more you process data, the less information you get. The likelihood of increasing information is zero. The likelihood of having the same amount of information you started with decreases the more steps you take. A simple case is when you play that game whereby people whisper something to the ear of someone else, and then someone whispers something to the ear of someone else, and so on, until you reach the end of the chain. By the end of that chain, the message is getting pushed. Well, that's pretty much what the theory says. So imagine you have these three systems. One is sending some data to the second system, that's the input, which then sends that data as an output, becoming an input for the third system, which then outputs Z. Now this is called a Markov chain, meaning just simply that each S1, S2, S3 depends only on the previous system. Excuse me. Well, the theory in question says that if the random variables, X, Y, and Z, are put in that particular format, a Markov chain, and one depends on the other, then the mutual information between X and Y is either equal or bigger than the mutual information between X and Z. So this, compared to this, means that by the time I reach Z, I have at most the same information, but more likely less, never more. Now that is counterintuitive for any semantic engine in this room, because it simply doesn't sound true that the more you process your data, the less information you get out of those data. There's something that doesn't fit in. It is a shift. There's a conceptual trick that we're not quite grasping. It's like looking at a magician. We know that it's not working that way, but we can't point out fingers to what is actually not right. So this tells you just the same story. The average amount of information that Z conveys about X is less than or equal to the average amount of information that Y conveys about X. Larger mutual information corresponds to greater statistical dependence between the system's input and output, etc. The point is that data processing tends to destroy information. That's the way of putting it in sort of a dramatic way. I said this is one side of the picture, and we're done with the quote-unquote technicalities. This is the syntax side of information analysis. I also stress that there are many other mathematical ways of dealing with information. These are not the only ones, but they are the basic ones. Shannon, the inverse translation principle, and the covariance. If you start thinking about these three pillars, you can see that all the stats you can be doing, that depends a lot on these three particular corners. Now, I've tried to convince you that no matter how much work we do with those three components, we can't squeeze out of these three components meaning. We just squeeze more data, more patterns. So who is dealing with meaning? Well, the philosophers, or at least some philosophers. So there's a whole side of a philosophy department which will be engaged with philosophical semantics. Now, I believe that by looking at that particular literature, we can gain some insight, some help, but not the kind of help that they think they are providing. It's not because these theories tell us how data become information, but because they indicate a possible way forward. And I'll try to show you how in a moment. This is a quick, it doesn't get any quicker, overview of some of the popular theories you find in the literature. Truth-theoretic semantics, which tries to reduce the meaning. We've always talked about language now, so forget about anything else. Of course, we're obsessed with language. But truth-theoretic semantics tries to reduce the meaning of, say, a sentence to its truth conditions. In other words, what do you mean by beep? Oh, by beep, I mean that's the case. If beep were true, I hope this registration doesn't go, this report doesn't go around too much. Then we have the inferential rule semantics. It has different names, but basically instead of looking at what happens with beep in the world, and its truthfulness, it looks at beep together with oh. So basically in the system, how the relationship between the systems casts light on the meaning in terms of role. It's like the difference between trying to match something to the world and trying to match something to something else within the system to understand the role that it plays within the system. So you don't try to understand John as a human being in the world, you try to understand John as a policeman in society. Then there's a third line, which normally associated with Wittgenstein, meaning as use. The idea is that those particular sentences, what we're trying to do with is to express our intentions, generate particular beliefs, in the people who are listening to us, but above all, we show that we understand the meaning of a sentence or a word by showing how to use it properly. It's like playing a game. As I talked about linguistic games. So the idea is that if you're good at that game, you know how to make those stories. Now, this is, which is the quickest and dirtiest way of producing an overview of philosophical semantics. There are many other theories, but those are the ones I'm interested in. They have a limit. These are either theories of criteria of meaning, in other words, ways of understanding what is the parameter, the meter, according to which I can measure your capacity to understand me. Compare this to the following analogy. Someone comes in and wants to know who is the speaker. Oh, who is Luciano Freud? So Luciano Freud is the one closer to projected text. That's not a definition of me, but it's a criterion to identify me. If I move away and you move closer, they will be misunderstanding you for me. So a criterion to identify something is not a definition of something. In this case, being able to tell when people understand the meaning of a particular token is not yet explaining what the meaning of that token is. It's just to be able to say, oh, they know how to play the game. So what's the game about? I don't know, but they know how to play. So that's one limit. The other limit is that they actually presuppose, remember, they presuppose the pasta. They presuppose the cash in the account. What they presuppose is that, for example, you can deal with truth by explaining, in order to explain meaning. Now, truth is a semantic notion. It is a heavily loaded semantic notion. So it is perfectly fine to say that meaning can be understood in terms of truth, or in other contexts, meaning can be understood in terms of possible worlds, truth, and so forth. These are semantic items which you can use if you don't want to provide a foundation, but a translation of some concepts into some other concepts. As I said, if you have £1,000 in the account, then I can tell you how to invest it. Over here. This doesn't tell you how to get the first £1,000. But they have a contribution to make. In fact, two, as far as I can tell. First, they stress that there is an active component dealing with meanings. It's a kind of semantic engine that transforms, for example, meaning into truth conditions, or meaning into linguistic abilities, or something that does something to the data in question. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, a good intuition. Two, that making things meaningful, semanticization of data, it's clearly a function from meaningless, or yet meaningful input to meaningful output. This seems to be innocuous. If you agree with this, you have already agreed that there is no information in the world. So, as usual with philosophy, we need to be careful. If you agree with this particular second point, you agree that in the world there are only data. That whatever information is in the world is produced by semantic engines like us. No such thing as talking about information in the world without us producing it. So here's what I think we have after this longish discussion, and we get to the more controversial bits. How do you pronounce it? Vice?
Vice.
Vice, as in fishes. As in Miami. Okay. So the Miami analogy, Vice analogy. So you have like two Joes that are grasping this particular problem, semantic information. On the one hand, you have quantitative analysis, information theory, and all the other friends, the three pillars, etc. And the other hand, you have semantic theory, the qualitative analysis. When you misapply both A and B, there are just two ways of cheating. A does less than it is said, but not meant to do. Remember all the mathematical stuff? It doesn't generate meaning. It didn't want to. It was not there for that. So it does less than it is said, but not meant to do. The other one presupposes correctly what is said mistakenly to deliver. Again, semantic theory is there for a different purpose. To understand, for example, how we learn a language from other people who speak that language and so on. So if we misuse A, or the mathematical, syntactic stuff, then we have fallacy. We're trying to squeeze semantics from syntax. And if we misuse B, then we have a different fallacy. We try to explain semantics by using semantics, which is not good. There are also other problems which I will only quickly highlight in case we want to spend some time doing the discussion. There's a binary fallacy all the time here going on, which is the following: the idea that information, semantic information, is either in the head of the speaker or the agent or outside. It's either on one side or the other side of the divide. I'd like to call your attention to the concept of food, which is not understandable unless you take together what is in the environment and a particular eater. Grass is not food for a tiger. It doesn't mean that grass is not food. It just means that we have asked the wrong question. There are relational concepts like food that require both items to make sense of them. So semantic information, I take it to be one of those, like food. There's also a problem on level of abstractions. We never stop at that particular issue thinking, wait a moment, what kind of perspective are we adopting here? What kind of interface we're adopting? Or to be more precise, what kind of level of abstraction are we using at which this data are being interpreted? As I said, a chemical description of a lemonade will not be successful in describing the taste of lemonade. We'll be very fine on chemical. There's also another problem, which is the starting problem with Shannon, but we won't see that now. What I want to ask you to do is bear with me for another 5 minutes and see whether you at least partially agree with the following picture that tries to get out of this semantic predicament. First of all, the interactions between the system, whatever is out there, the battery, the flat, the car, and so on, and the agent-generated data used by the agent to create the model, the semantic information of the system. It's not, the data come from the clashing between the agent and the system. They're not floating out there. Second, the models of the system, or the semantic information, tries to satisfy two quality requirements, which I'm sure here, not everyday stuff. Fit for purpose and correct. Actually, the problem expression is right first time. When you build something, when you build a particular artifact, you try to satisfy these two quality requirements immediately. You have it fit for purpose and right first time, so that when it's out in the world, the refinement of that particular gadget or product will be smooth. Getting close to the picture. The other bit we need is that interactions with the system provide a competitive environment. Remember the agent interacting with the car, with the flat battery. The interactions provide a competitive environment within which the incorrect models are revised or abandoned. This is a long story to be told in terms of Bayesian learning, which you don't want to hear, I'm sure. But if you agree with this, if you agree that the interaction between the agent and the environment are the competitive context where models incorrect are revised or abandoned, that means that we should give up any hope of ever convincing humanity that astrology is rubbish. How does that come from this? Because astrology doesn't work in a competitive environment. It doesn't have any friction with the world. Not having any friction with the world, it cannot be shown by the world to be an incorrect model. Or black cats, not really that black, or you name it. There's a whole semantic world out there that humans create, which has no friction with the real world out there, and therefore will never have to pass the test of surviving in a competitive environment. Next generations and future generations will have fantastic beliefs, amazingly unrelated to the way the world is, but they will not have to pass the test of that particular clash against the world. and I hope that the picture in a moment will this. Semantic information is the outcome of an active interpretation of the system, applied system. That is the source of the relevant data, not of its passive representation. That's when philosophers start leaving the room. The idea that we do not work like Xerox machines is for most philosophers revolt. The idea that, at least of a physicist kind, the view that we actually live in a world created by us on the basis of the data that we acquire from the world seems to be repulsive. But that's what I'd like to try to convince you about. And all we need to introduce, again, the last bit, and the picture I hope will help, is that the active interpretation is the task of semantic engines like us. Now, by that, I also mean to say that unless we invent something radically different and new in artificial intelligence, there's no chance of getting semantics out of computers. And that's the end of the story. So that's it just from the computer science department. So all that about the singularity stuff, I don't know if you have followed that kind of science fiction or something like that. That is just, it's a good way of squeezing money out of the government, but that's not it. Okay, so here's the picture. This is a car with its battery being flat and so on, and we have John, who's interacting with the battery. The sensory motor interactions, John seeing the car, trying the car, the light flashing and so on, they generate some data that we know, the gods up in the clouds look and say, oh, see, John interacting with the car is producing all this data, which represent the input for, and that's the crucial place where semantics happens, for an interpretation by the agent. This interpretation outputs information which is constrained by the same interactions, which outputs an interpretation of the system. There are some bits here which are less trivial than, of course, the whole simplification indicates. And I'd like to leave you with this kind of suggestions in mind. Remember the data are generated by the encounter between the embodied, embedded agent and the system that the agent is interacting with. Now they provide an input at a specific level of abstraction, namely our body, for example, and the five senses, for an interpretation which then, as I said, provides the information that the particular system being in state 5, whatever that state is, we don't know. By having the data referring to this particular system R in state F, what we get is the information that R is F, or the model, which is the same. Now, I'd like to call your attention to these two guys here. The system, not like the car, the flat battery, and the source of the data. It happens quite often that the source of the data and the system, to simplify, about which the data are not the same. I'll tell you more about this divide in the next click. But first of all, let me try to show you where we could get some meaning into the data. So the data refer, as I said a moment ago, refer to the system R, refer to the state, and they become information, the semantic stuff, the stuff that we want. Namely that R is F, that the battery is flat. If and only if, that's the biconditional, there's a level abstraction, an interface, at which, or through which, they get interpreted. And I know that some of you will think, oh, gosh, it took an hour to get there. Typical philosophy. They're interpreted in such a way that, and here's the little trick, the mutual information, remember I will spend a bit of time on this, the mutual information between R being in state phi, once you have R being F, is not increasable. Now, this, let me try to clarify this point as it seems to be less digestible. It means that epistemologically from a cognitive side. You kick it, you may eat it, but you don't know it. What you know is the model, not the epistemic output of your interface with a particular gadget. So whatever R is in, whatever phi is, all you're going to get is the information that R is F. This counts as information given that the data are produced by, say, the simplified system, only if this satisfies the non-increasable mutual information. Remember what happened when the mutual information was not increasable? The two circles were overlapping. You couldn't see any difference. That's why thinking that this is red is not distinguishable from this being red. For us, the world is the way we model it, and there's no difference. We just don't get any other way of looking at the world. So this being the case, then what we have in terms of interpretation is the information that the system is in that state. This happens only in two cases. One is the case in which we have a noiseless channel, and that's in philosophy what we call realism, of one kind: scientific realism, naive realism, sophisticated realism, my grandpa realism, you name it. But it means that ultimately what we get, let's say it's like the Wizard, what you see is what you get. The world, thank goodness, there's a noiseless channel between us and the world will tell us the way it is. So this is the max value of mutual information is satisfied. Two things overlap. The semantic information I have about the world is what the world is like, because the world is just telling you. Or there's another way in which you have complete overlap. I hope that analogy can help. Either you have a noiseless channel between a particular source and you, or you actually create the source. Conan Doyle cannot be wrong about whether Sherlock Holmes ever went to the body. Not because he has a noiseless channel with respect to that particular source, but because by saying that he never did, he just made it that he never did. That's the relationship that is between God and God knows the universe. Just allow for this, because God created the universe. So it's just the Conan Doyle knowing what Sherlock Holmes has done with respect to the body of life. Never went there. How do you know? Well, I just said it. So you have two ways of having the maximization of mutual information between your information and the data in the world. Either there's a perfectly noiseless channel, or there's a constitutive element here. The interpretation generates this particular model, which then of course you're going to find it perfectly fine in the world. Remember the competitive environment in which things get refined. And we're getting to the end. If there's no R, if there's no system, I told you a moment ago that I was going to leave you with this particular thought of mine, then all you have is a virtual world. This is typical down the road in computer graphics. In computer graphics, what you have is a source of data which gets interpreted by us as a particular way of understanding the world, but this model is not about a system which is the reference to the data. This model is actually about the data. So a way of understanding virtual reality is having this picture, but you have a source, but a source is not what the source is about. If we have no S here, then we are in a state of total complete ignorance. It's like not even being able to know that you don't know, because there's no source whatsoever. It's just a blank. It's just walking parallel to, say, a completely inconceivable world. It's like thinking, it's like Oedipus waking up one day, and all of a sudden there was that world there. He was actually sleeping. source and the target of the data, the system in particular case, then an easy way of understanding this is by saying, look, if they're the same, that's not normally what happens in perception. The perception that something is the case is based on the fact that the system in question is actually the source of the data. A way of understanding communication or testimony, for example, is by saying, look, the system and the target are not the same. I've been told by Peter that there will be coffee later. Well, Peter is the source, which is sending me some data which I interpret in terms of coffee later, but coffee is about Peter. Now, what my understanding is that in terms of comparing your realist inclinations, if you think that what the world is doing to us is sending data as a source not necessarily identical to the system about which those data are, then you have anti-realist inclination. If you think that, on the other hand, what the world does is being the source and the system at the same time, and the message is not about something else, it's about itself. To put it metaphorically, that the world confesses itself to us through our perceptions, then you are a very strong realist. Now, I hope you are not, but I try to at least put some doubts in your minds about this realist picture. And here's the conclusion. The relation between semantic information and its target is not one of correspondence or photocopy or Xerox, but one of retrofitness. We get the data, we interpret them, and we just build models which then gets refined and survive, hopefully, the test of reality. We can have, or it is possible to support an anti-representationalist, or forget about the anti-naturalist, which is for the philosophers, view. And essence is that the system is the source of the data, but the interpreted data, the information we have in our hands, do not represent the system, no more than a radio signal represents the radio sending it. You get some music which doesn't tell you anything about the actual gadget sending their music. Now this is what happens, for example, when you compare computer graphics and computer vision. One is the invert of the other. We're very good at computer graphics, we're very bad at computer vision. Why? Well, because in computer graphics, what we have is a decent understanding of the physical laws, function, and a way of building the system. That's why we get models, good models. All the games down the road, all the video games that we have, they're getting better by the day. The more we know about the physical laws, the function, how it works, the better we get at building the system, the better we are at producing models. It's technology and physics. Unfortunately, we have no way of inverting.
Can you just say what you mean by computer vision?
It's what a robot does in order to find, for example, in this room, 3 chairs, red chairs, to take them in another room. It's just what we do, orientation, navigation, avoidance of obstacles, pattern recognition. Pattern recognition, of course, meaning target identification for the military, but that's not.
Like not vision as in imaginative vision.
No vision as in imagine. No.
Yeah.
Is what you hope all those robots in Afghanistan are good at. So that kind of computer vision is actually not just a knowledge that we're not good at that. So what we can do is simply try to guess what would be a way of inverting, how to move from the model to the system. But remember, we never get to the system, so the best we can do is actually have a probability distribution. We have the conclusion that probably best what the system is, given the fact that the probability of the system being such and such, given the model multiplied by the probability of the model is such and such. In other words, that's the way we see the world. Well, it's a good way of committing ourselves ontologically, for philosophers, to tell that that's the way the world is itself. But it's a probability distribution. We have no certainty. There's no way of applying that kind of realism straight away. So here's the final sentence. The world as we consciously experience it is the totality of its models as we create it. We are cognitive amphibians. as embodied and embedded physical agents, we live in and interact with the world in itself. All the philosophers with the nominal world, the world an sich, as Kant would have said. So I thought moment of German. Things in themselves. But as epistemic agents, and as the other half of us, we experience and inhabit the world as a virtual reality constrained by the world in itself. And this double nature is inevitable. I hope that we will have a lively discussion about this, and thank you so much for all your patience. Thank you. Took longer than we expected, but
Yeah, no, that's fine. I like this cognitive amphibians. I love that. Yeah, that's okay. So I suppose that we'll open the floor to people. Yeah, see what they are discussing and framings, and we may also deconstruct where you were standing while you were talking, making all this stuff. You presupposed semantics, I suppose, yourself, did you? Francesca?
I have one single question. Starting from the last sentence, cognitive convenience and what makes us different from animals then?
okay.
I mean, in the sense, those two sentences could be applied to animals too, to do the same thing.
Can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understood.
I think you could show the last two sentences if you can.
Yeah.
These last two sentences.
Yeah. As
You're
an
on
epistemic
Francesca.
agents, we experience and inhabit the world as a virtual reality constrained by the world in itself. And the cognitive and feedback. So basically, what I'm asking is, in what sense animals are different from us? Because basically I think they do the same things.
Yeah, it's a good question and a difficult question to answer. What I can provide is a perspective on it, which
No, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said.
yeah.
And myself, I think that we're not so different from others,
Yeah.
but even cognitively. And that's the
I think we might be on the same side, because I believe that there's an immense gap between humans and animals, unbridgeable. And however, some people think that that gap is provided by a more kind of feature. I believe that it's provided by a less feature. Let me try to clarify this point. It's very unorthodox, so, and it's a bit silly. I'm happy to show that it's not shareable by anyone else. But I find it convincing, namely that the problem that we have in understanding the special position that humans have in the animal kingdom is not by putting us cognitively in a sort of a super animal position, but putting us outside the animal kingdom in the following sense, that we have lost the ability of being glued to the world. We're no longer coupled to the world in the here, now, nothing else sort of attitude. There are a number of ways of explaining this. For example, you tell someone that many of us will do this. For example, that you tell someone that Peter is human, or Peter is that the cup is white, and or the chair is red, and we are immediately thinking that the table is not red. Now, think about this for a moment. All the thinking that we do in terms of things not being the way they are. The table is not red. There's not a unicorn in this room. What I will do tomorrow. Seeing this as a little tank I can play with. Or understanding negative truths, as I said a moment ago. So, understanding something as something else. Understanding negative truths. There's no unicorn in this room. Understanding the possibility of things being otherwise. I could have been not here if I had lost or if I had missed the train. and the possibility of things being a certain way. Tomorrow I might be in York. Now these are all possibilities, as we say, possibilities that animals don't deal with.
That's the point. Because
You mean abstract thinking, you mean we develop abstract thinking whereas animals?
no, it's not that.
If you like to talk about abstraction, it's a dangerous word for philosophers, but
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. Now, I don't mind. One word which I removed from here was imagination, just to be open.
Is language related to this?
And language, for example, again, a very unorthodox view these days, but it was more popular in the 19th century, the view that language is not the primary function of language is not about communication, it's about building the world. That we acquire language in order to make sure that the immense pressure that we survive at the beginning of our lives, in terms of you are here to be coupled to the world, and that's it. We survive that pressure by detaching ourselves from the world thanks to language. We grab as if we were sinking. And the first language we have, that's why we learn it so fast, because that's the only survival tool we have in order to make sure that this decoupling from the world is successful. At that point, once you have a full language barrier between you and the world, then the whole machinery starts moving. That's why I think we might be moving in the same direction, although for different reasons. But anyway, sorry. That was a long answer to the
Thank you. There are not easy questions. Edgar?
Just coming back from that, before that last interjection, I was thinking the interesting thing that's not there in your model was a sense of the social. So yours is a very individualist understanding, and I'm particularly drawing on Harry Collins' most recent work on tacit and explicit language, that really emphasises the social as a way of differentiating even the higher capability animals from humans, or certainly humans from lower collaborative social activity kind of thing. But then just struck with your very last points about the role of language, and particularly Searle's re-articulation of his construction of social reality, where he said he takes language as both a basic biological fact and something through the ontological capabilities of creating worlds, etc., etc. And obviously, language use and speech acts in that way have a very social element as well. So I'm just wondering whether the absence of the social is a intentional exclusion. You ran out of time and you kind of stopped at that point.
It's not an intentional exclusion, but it's a conscious limit or whatever it's here. In other words, I would completely buy the picture that suggests that working in a Cartesian environment, in other words, working with a single standalone agent who by him or herself is going to do the whole job, it's fiction. It's a good abstraction to start with. That's where I would like to put my sort of moderate Cartesian attitude. But it's definitely not the real story. The real story happens when all that is multiplied and is used within a multi-agent system, which is provided by a language, which is the tool whereby all this happens. So you put this machinery, and you multiply the agents in a multi-agent system, interacting with them, you provide them with the capacity of developing a language, the need for a language in order to do all this, and then we start getting the real machinery working, and I think it has real social implications. But I mean, I'm completely on that side. Social epistemology is where we should be going.
I think it's implicit, if I understand, it's my way of understanding what Edgar says, is that the social is constituted in a primary sense. That's before you start everything, you have that, and then you have all the other, not simply that you can carry that into a context.
It really is difficult. I have the impression that it's an impossible problem to solve, to determine the priority, so ontologically, not just in general. When we are born in society, that goes without saying, and then end of the game. But if you look at in abstract, from a percent of what comes first, the individual or the group? It's impossible to tell. But it's important to start looking at that as a dynamic interaction, whereby individuals also change the way the group interacts in the language. So again, language is not fixed, but individual harmonies, they use new ways of conceptualizing the world, etc. So I would like to bypass the problem of what comes first by saying whatever comes first, they start interacting. They dance together, and to tango you need two. Who invites whom? That's something I don't want to get into, but they tango. On that, I'm sure.
I'm dancing tango. I know Attila, and then.
Sorry, actually I have two questions, but I will just ask one. I hope it's short.
You can ask two.
No, because it's getting
I'm
very.
curious about the
I will
second
ask afterwards. As a general interest, how does your approach differ from second-order cybernetics, autopoiesis, generation theory?
To know a little bit more, just tell me more about what you have in mind.
So Heinz von Förster's work and Mascherano Varela's autopoiesis. And the social system theory.
Well, the strong analogies. I mean, especially with the Macaroni Varela work, not least because I like it a lot. I would draw the following distinction if one has to be drawn, which is partly what I said a moment ago in terms of looking at human agents as broken mechanisms, not super-fit mechanisms. Basically, the view is that in the evolution of the animal kingdom, of animals, nature made many mistakes, and we are one of them. We are as old as some extraordinary animals that should be here. The fact that we compensate by developing what we develop, it just, as it happens, lucky, that's why we're here. But the view that I'm in a different context that I'm trying to support is that we should be serious about evolution being random. And evolution also taking roads which are simply allowed. Not because what you get is fit, but because there's nothing to stop that particular development. So I think that would be...
I'm sorry, but do you see evolution as a given or as a model of something?
Tell me more.
But to accept evolution as being random, is that our interpretation of, is that a model we come up with that helps us explain, or is it a given?
Yeah, it's the best we can come up with. For an anti-realist like me, the vague question, or is that the way the world is in itself, doesn't buy anything. So I have trouble in understanding what the nature of the question is. But I do have the impression that we are right in committing ourselves to that particular model, without committing ourselves to the fact that the model is realistic in the sense of grasping what the world is in itself. Can I just expand on this a little bit back? The kind of epistemology I'm presenting here is, as I said, it's not common, and it's a shame. But it's the attempt of showing that knowledge is, again, I've used this metaphor a moment ago, is like cooking. That the data are the ingredients in the fridge. You pick up the fridge, open it, get the data, cook that particular meal. Nobody would try to look at the meal in front of you and try to say, oh, is this a good representation of what was in the fridge? What are you talking about?
Sounds like an Italian cathedral.
Sorry about that, guys. And so it is not about representation. It's about what you do with the data and how you process them. What you do with the ingredients in order to cook. So by the end, you wouldn't look at the Colosseum in order to understand whether that is a good representation of bricks. No. At the same time, it's not anti-realist in the sense that, oh, there's no Colosseum then. Oh, who said that? Or there's no pizza then, because you just process all the ingredients. So instead of thinking, this is the way the world is, and here is a good representation of the world as it is, the view is, this is the world, is sending us data, we process the data, we create a model which hopefully is going to pass the test of being fit for purpose. Fit for purpose is like the shoe being fit to then something on the wall. It tells you that that can work like a hammer. It doesn't tell you, what is the real nature of the hammer and the nail and the wall. That's not the kind of questions we address. So going back to your point, when it comes to microbiome especially, I said there might be just different branches of the same tree. So, and I'd be very happy to be on that particular tree. Having said that, the different branch that I would like to sort of occupy is the one which looks at humanity as something that, as a sort of animals, they are coping with a problem rather than a gift. To be explicit, having a mind is having something less than an animal, not something more. I know it sounds strange, but if you start thinking in those terms, you also understand why looking for a mind in the brain is it's a mistake. It's like looking inside the TV that is not working for a component that is the non-working essence. It's religious. You look at that particular system, which is not working in a particular way, and says, oh, it's broken. Oh, and where is the broken substance? Not the broken organ. I don't find it. No, of course you cannot find it. It's broken. The things are not working as they would be working in an animal. Therefore, we develop all this. We develop socialization, language, this, in order to cope with something which is not the here, now, zero imagination, zero intelligence, zero mind. It's a weird way of looking at things. But I hope that the more you think about those terms, the more meaningful it becomes. Hopefully.
Online question.
My question is related to Edgar. You always said abstraction is a dangerous word, but in the heart of your model, there is a mention of a level of abstraction. If there is a level of abstraction, what do you mean by abstraction and where it is?
Yeah, good point. Level of abstraction is terminology that is borrowed from computer science. So let me try to pay my debt to that particular source. Among many others, one interesting point about computer science when you compare to physics or chemistry or something else is that it's a science which builds its objects, doesn't study them only, actually produces what it studies. So that's why it's something with engineering rather than just strictly science. By engineering something, you need to decide before you build it what kind of things, what kind of features you're going to look for. This, in that particular context, are called observables. They don't have to be physically observables. You could have the engineering of the Greek gods. You want to engineer or build a whole mythology. And you decide, okay, we're going to have 10 gods. And the observables of the gods are 5 men, 5 females, all omnipotent, 3 are nasty. So those are the observables of the gods. If you put the observables together, that they constitute a level of abstraction. So when the engineer needs to build an ATM machine, the first question is, okay, what you want and what are the observables that we're dealing with? Are we dealing, for example, with electricity, the plastic, the metals of that, or are we dealing with the software, the human-computer interface, or so what are the observables of that particular system that we are interested in? Put together the observables, you constitute a level of abstraction, put together more levels of abstraction, and you get a gradient of abstraction. The easy way of understanding all this is in terms of interface. An interface, the kind of stuff that we deal with daily on a computer, it's a level of abstraction. It shows certain things, not others. It allows for certain kind of dynamics, transition within those particular observables, and not others. So, for anything that I've said today, translating that into interface would be perfect in that case.
Okay, but you mean it is in the social world? I mean, where is this abstraction? Where is this?
Okay, well, abstraction
it's
is
an individual thing, or it's something that is.
Okay. So in the talk, I was talking mainly in terms of because I was referring to quite a lot of individual perceptions. The level of abstraction was is constituted by the 5 senses with which we are provided as agents. There'll be more than 5, but just to simplify. But what we hear, what we can taste. So those are the observables that we are allowed to deal with. I said, unfortunately, abstraction is a little term. You can talk about level of conceptualization or level of access to data. Abstraction there doesn't, because of the computer science provenance of the terminology, it doesn't really provide anything in terms of intellectual abstraction or something. That's got anything to do. It's not abstract as in mathematically abstract or something. It's just that we're talking about the kind of the selection of observables that we are going to deal with in this particular context. So if we were to enhance the human being with infrared observables, then we would have, say, 5 plus 6 senses. So there will be an extra set of observables we need to take into account in the production of data. Does that make sense?
But I wanted to say it's another pity. Perhaps we should have invited to the Ron Stamper. We have a long history of working in this area for Ron Stamper in the 1970s. And we did try to build a semantic engine. We were talking about semantic engines. So it's rather a shame that we didn't have him here to...
well, normally have tough times with computer scientists who believe that AI is feasible. Given the knowledge we have of computer science today, I'm not saying that in the far future we won't be able to do it. I don't know. Far future is far. But given what we know now and what we can forecast in terms of our knowledge now, AI is not even visible, not even considered. It's not even close to making sense of it.
And certainly Ronald was not that kind of a person. He was very active. One of his statements was, "There's no knowledge without a knower." So very much in tune with the arguments that you're making.
I just got a really, perhaps a dumb question from a computer scientist in the room. But given your initial discussions about information theory and your argument about we humanity as the totality of the models that we create, in the statement here, how would we know the dog in a separate world of separate meaning, constructing separate meanings in order to interact with the information? How would we know that they don't have their own meaning, and how would they know that we have our meaning? How would they observe us and we observe them if we were completely socially constructing a different meaning situation in terms of your information flow between them? Because our discussion about this table or even this meeting here or all of it could be discussed from an information theory, perhaps in a kind of human-machine perspective, and that argument fits with the AI argument as well.
Excellent point. Let me, we don't. And let me give you 2 quick references to philosophical literature which banks exactly on that rather deep point that you were making. One, Wittgenstein, when it says, if lions could speak to us, we wouldn't be able to understand them. Why? Because the interaction they have with the world is completely different. It's a kind of, you just don't understand what it means to be on 4 legs hunting for animals that speak like just so that's goes in the direction that you were pointing out, I believe. The other one is a famous paper called What's It Like to Be a Bat? I mean, it's a classic for any undergrad in philosophy. And it's a classic because it shows that we haven't got a clue whatsoever. What it would be like to have the so-called qualia, the kind of internal impressions of what the world feels like being a human being, to me or to us as a species. If you are a bat, just black, 0. That is when I want to say it's not source. So even guessing is rather pointless. But that seems to me in line with the view that we are building our own robotics, so our own envelope. The environment as we unveiled, German word to say the world around us as we experience it, is our own construction. Now, I'm going to nowhere here that there are lots of people thinking their way, but trust me, if you have a philosophy department, they're going to shoot you because they're like, at least in some, at least in Oxford, I don't know, maybe the wrong department where I'm hanging around. But that's not the kind of anti-realism that goes down well in certain circles, epistemologically speaking, today. It seems to be wrong, not in touch with social constructivism in sciences, and even with some sciences like neuroscience, where we just have to study attention like as a topic for a few years to know that it's immense. What we get or what we don't get, what we focus on, what we don't. So this idea that we're there like receptors of the nature of the world and representing it as it is, doesn't make any sense.
But there is the branch of realism, critical realism, where Roy Lasker, where the fallibility of our views of the world is the key to how would you relate to this.
Well, I think that is important because
it's not correspondence, it's exactly the opposite. It's the fallibility of our ideas that proves that the world is more than we.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The world is out there, whatever is in itself. It's not that it's, again, some of you have dealt with Kant and the idea that the world in itself is unknowable. Let me offer this metaphor and then come back to the point. The two ways of understanding the unknowability of the world in itself. One is to say you have no access. Zero. It's like what is happening in the other room and no input. That's it. Or another way, which is the way I prefer, is to say, look, it's unknowable because it's not exhaustive. No matter how much you do and how much you deeply investigate, there will always be more to understand, different angles, different levels of structures. So it's like saying, for Kant, you cannot open the fridge. For me, it's an infinite fridge. You can open it, but there's more than you can possibly cook. So that's coming to, and then coming to your this point. It's the idea that this, unfortunately, that's the vocabulary I've been using, so forgive me. And so the models that we have been of the interpretation of the world clashes against some lack of affordances there. It's like saying, look, whereas black cats bringing bad luck would never clash against the world, walking out of the window, third floor, and killing yourself, it does. And therefore, it's not because that's the way the world is in itself, but that's because the other half of us, the amphibians, who are embodied and embedded in the world, they have to respect those kind of physical laws as it happens. So, cognitively, the idea that fallibilism shows that there is a world, it's out there and it's hard, and it doesn't allow anything to go. But lots of things are. Another way to say, if you have only eyes to build buildings, well, only certain kind of buildings will be buildable. You cannot build the Colosseum, or you cannot build a bridge or whatever. But you see, given those data, only something is easily constructible, more easily than something else, and something is out of us. The long history of humanity is to realize that all those projections were less and less and less allowed by the world.
Building on that, I think just a final short comment. Building on that kind of, I understand your background comes from philosophy, and whereas we are in information systems, but having read what information system studies that understands constructivism and realism, you take out the constructivism label, and I would have put you in the camp of the realists.
Yeah, well that's why...
Really the information systems literature.
I like that, absolutely. You see, people like Kant, for example, they would describe themselves as the real realist. Mm. And someone like Bishop Berkeley, who thought that the world was... the construction of God's mind, and you were living within God's mind. Therefore, there were no things but ideas. And he thought it was just joining common sense. That if you could just understand common sense well enough, then that kind of realism would buy him this particular theory, this total idealist view that there's no world, there's just God and other minds interacting with other minds, and you interacting with a chair, you're actually interacting with God's idea of the chair. So as I said, the authors are very good at getting common sense and intuitions on their side. I love the idea of being described as a realist. Unfortunately, you also have to couple with the terminology in the right circles, and among philosophers, I will not. I will be considered an anti-realist. But
that's very interesting.
I'm happy to join the realist crowd. It's going to be a price.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.